Well, let me first, before I start with the loving mom and tough career goals, let me first show a slide that I've shown last year already that shows a number of articles in the Journal of Personality, which is one of our flagship journals, that included the term character in their abstract or title. And as you can see, there is a comeback of the character and personality psychology, but compared to the early parts of the 20th century, well, research on character still occupies a niche, at least in personality psychology. And one has to say it was not without nothing that character, so to say, vanished from the scene, because there was a lot of critique, and actually the most fundamental critique was on or questioned the entire existence of stable character traits. And more than one generation of researchers claimed that there is no such thing like character. What people do, think, and feel is merely a function of situational cues and pressures. And this critique was mainly based on findings that pointed out a lack of consistency in moral behavior. So a child, for example, can be consistently honest with his peers, but maybe a chronic liar with his parents or teachers, or a student that describes herself as generally altruistic may ignore a person in need of care when she's in a hurry to the lecture room. And consistency is a fundamental thing, a fundamental issue when it comes to traits in general, not only character traits, also personality traits. Wolf Leeson recently pointed out that consistency is what makes a behavior a trait rather than an accident, a fluke, or the sole consequence of circumstances. So if we find some degree of behavioral consistency across situations, and this is actually not only a necessary but a sufficient criterion for assuming that some internal traits may cause these behaviors. And the consistency issue was also one, maybe the major issue of the person-situation debate, with the person side claiming that, yes, there is behavioral consistency and stable traits produce this behavioral consistency, and the situation side claiming that there is no behavioral consistency at all. Changing situations produce behavioral inconsistency. Well, today, I would say it's fair to say that most scholars agree that both situations were too simplistic, and I think most of us have started to study the ways in which both the person and the situations can affect an individual's behavior in a particular situation. And in this regard, also the research question has changed. So we are not asking anymore, is there or whether there is behavioral consistency at all. We have begun to ask when, how, and why people show behavioral consistency on the one hand, or maybe variability on the other hand. And this is also the set of questions that I want to address, or that I wanted to address in my research project, and my focus was on a specific kind of behavior, namely virtuous behavior. So I wanted to take a fresh look at the nature and degree of consistency in character traits and virtues in people's daily life. And I focused on the 6 core virtues that are proposed in the Virtues in Action approach by Peterson and Seligman, namely wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence. And my question was, or I wanted to take a look at the degree to which individuals show these virtues in their daily life, to which degree they show these consistent, or to which degree they vary across situations in these 6 virtue domains. And in line with Will's density distribution approach, I assume that there's not only one important kind of behavioral consistency, but that character traits can produce different kinds of consistency to different degrees, and that character traits well, might be best described as density distributions of character states. And the character states can be considered the manifestation of a character trait in a given moment. So it describes how a person is in a given moment rather than in general. And here are 3 hypothetical density distributions for courage, and as you can see, these 3 individuals show very different typical kinds of, or average kinds of levels of courage, but they also vary widely in their courageous behavior. So Paul considers himself as the most courageous person, but there are situations in which he is less courageous than Julia and Sam. So this is the idea of the density distribution approach, and it is meant to capture both the wide degree of, or the wide degree of behavioral inconsistency on the one hand, but also like relatively stable between person differences in average levels, and maybe also like size of the distributions, like range of behaviors. And well, my idea was this approach is probably also suitable to describe virtues, and I studied this in a special sample, namely in a sample of working parents. The majority was married or in a relationship, and 60% were part-time, 40% full-time, and 55% had 2 children, and the range was 1 to 3 children. And all participants were equipped with a smartphone that was programmed with a mobile data collection program, and sorry, that thing doesn't really work. And this program triggered the participants 6 times per day over 10 days to complete reports about their momentary behavior. And each report included questions about their virtue states. So I will come back in a minute how I measured these virtue states, about their big 5 personality states, about their positive and negative effect, about the role context in which they were in, so to which degree they were in the parent role or in the job role, and the number of interaction partners they were with. And I had a very compliant sample, obedient, so to say. So they completed more than 52 out of 60 reports, and in total I collected 4,355 reports. So that is a sample size on the reports level. And here's, to give you an idea how I measured the virtue states. So every time the smartphone triggered the participants to complete the reports, they were asked, think about your behavior during the last 30 minutes. To what degree would you describe it as, for example, smart versus unwise, brave versus coward, friendly versus unfriendly, fair versus unfair, respectful versus arrogant, or faithful versus faithless. And each of the 6 virtue domains was measured with 4 different bipolar items, and participants could answer these on a 7-point scale.
Just a clarification question. You didn't use the specific character traits that they speak about, or do you just generate your own adjectives based on 6?
Well, these are based on a pre-study that I've ran on more than 300 students. So this is collected. So I presented that last year. Right. So we tested. These are adjectives that were selected from that pre-study to measure.
Not from the 24th strength that they talk about then.
No. They're not the 24th strengths exactly. No. Okay, no, I got it. Sorry. Okay, so the first question was whether virtues can indeed be described as density distributions of their states. And a necessary condition, of course, to do this is that participants actually differed in their virtues from moment to moment, and are not displaying the same virtues all the time. So I looked at the within and between person variance, and here you see the within and between person variability in the 6 virtue domains. And the more red colored bars show the within person variance, and what that shows is that participants differed more from moment to moment in their wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and also transcendence than they differed from each other on average. And so to further illustrate this, here you see the density distributions for one random participant of the sample, and here you can see that this participant showed all different levels of the 6 virtue domains, but this person also had for all 6 domains a typical level that he or she showed most of the time. So this is pretty much according to what Will would suggest, a nice density distribution pattern, I would think, yeah. And but I was, another necessary condition, if it's really useful, if it's reasonable to think about virtues as density distributions, is that they are also relatively stable between person differences in the average tendencies or in the central tendencies of these distributions. So the question was whether here you see, for example, whether the average level and maybe also the size of these distributions here can be considered stable between person differences. And what you see here is density distributions for the wisdom domains for 4 different participants. And you see that these distributions look very different, so people differ in what level of wisdom they show, how often they do it, and also like in the range of behaviors. And so the question was whether these average tendencies are actually meaningful individual difference characteristics. And I split the reports of each participant into 2 equal halves and calculated the mean and the standard deviation for each half and looked whether I could find some stability in these 2 halves. And here, here are the results. And so what you see is that for the 6 virtue domains, the mean levels for the 2 halves are nearly perfectly stable, and also the standard deviations are clearly beyond chance. And what that means is, if you have observed one of my participants for 5 days and have an idea about the average, about their average virtue trends that they show over these 5 days, you can nearly perfectly predict how they're going to act during the next 5 days, and also what range of virtuous states they will show during the next 5 days. The same, to have a comparison, the same pattern showed up for the big 5 states and also for positive and negative effect. So in sum, for the first set of questions, I found that virtues seem to be indeed well described as density distributions of their states, because individuals seem to express nearly all levels of their 6 virtue states in their everyday behavior. And on average, individuals differ more from moment to moment than they differ from each other. But the average tendencies, that is like the average virtue states and also the range of behaviors, are highly stable individual difference characteristics. All right, so that was my first set of findings, but I was actually more interested, or even more interested, in whether this large degree of within-person variability of of the difference that people show from moment to moment can be linked to situational cues, or more specifically, I wanted to know whether individuals show different virtue states in the job role as compared to in the parent role. And so I tested this with multi-level modeling. I know we are not supposed to present any analyses or technical results, but I will show some numbers, and I will try to walk you through that. So let me first of all say that I included the number of interaction partners as a control variable to make sure that the effects were not only driven by the mere presence of others, right? So I wanted to make sure that it's really the role context, the perceived role context, that drives the effects. And what you then see are a lot of stars, and that is a good sign, because what it means is, in fact, I found that both role contexts were related to the 6 virtue domains. But what I did then is I tested whether the beta coefficients of these 2 predictors could be constrained to be equal. So that means I tested whether one role is maybe more important than the other for each virtue domain, whether there's a key role in which one virtue is more often displayed than in the other role. And I found that they were actually different for all 6 virtue domains. So it turned out that in the job role, participants displayed significantly more like wisdom, courage, and justice. And in the parent role, the virtue states that were more important were humanity, temperance, and transcendence. So these were the average effects. So there were specific virtue role links. But these were only true for the average participants. And the next step, and that is possible with multi-level modeling, I tested whether individuals differed in the degree to which they react to a certain role context. So I looked at the random parameters, and here you see again a lot of stars. And that means that there was indeed significant variance in the links between the two role contexts and the degree to which participants reacted in terms of their virtue states. So, for example, while some individuals may, or most individuals may indeed increase in wisdom while being in the job role, that is not true for everyone. So some seem to be like remain stable in their job role. Okay, so in some I found like specific job virtue links. So virtues seem to be indeed well described as a function of the social role context people are acting in, but it is important to keep in mind that there are significant between-person differences. Okay, so first we have seen that individuals differ in their virtue states from moment to moment, and they do that not totally like randomly, but partly as a function of the social role they are currently acting in. But I was also interested in the consequences of acting in characters, like showing virtues in your daily life. And according to positive psychologists, well, showing virtues or acting in character and should be positive related to well-being and positive affect and life satisfaction. And I tested whether showing virtue states in a given moment was actually linked to positive and negative affect in that given moment. And again, I used multi-level modeling, and again, I found significant effects. And what I found was that wisdom, courage, and justice was positively linked to positive effects. So experiencing these virtue states had a positive effect on positive effect, whereas humanity and transcendence decreased negative effect. And I think more interesting is like showing temperance increased negative effects. So Angela isn't here, but I think she would agree that showing self-control and being modest is not always easy. So that can be exhausting, and eating not the whole chocolate but only a little piece might be painful and actually increase your negative effect. But these people actually that showed most temperance were those who had on average lowest negative effect. So it seems that they're pretty good in regulating, but in that given moment it's exhausting. Again, there were significant individual differences in these links, so not everyone had similar links between acting in virtue and experiencing positive or negative effect. So there were, again, specific links between virtue states and positive and negative effect, while we have to keep in mind that there are significant between-person differences. So maybe you have recognized what I recognized when I looked at these results, that the same virtue states that are linked to positive and negative effect were also specifically linked to the two role contexts. And I couldn't rule out the possibility that it's not the virtue states, but being in that role that leads to positive and negative effect. And so I couldn't rule out this possibility, so because there were indeed links between the roles and positive and negative effect, but if I took a closer look, it turned out it's only the job role and positive effect that were really significantly related. For negative effect, the roles didn't really play a big role because less than 5% of the variance was explained by the role context. So, but in the following, I concentrated on positive effect and being in the job role, and I tested whether the effects of the virtues that are typically displayed in the job role on positive effect hold when I included the job role as a control variable. And what I also did is I tested whether the virtues might mediate the effects of the job role on positive effect. So that means I assumed that acting wisely, courageous, and fair-minded in the job role may be adaptive and functional and could therefore increase my positive effect in that given job role. And here are the results. This is a multi-level structural equation modeling, and I tested the mediation effect, but first what you see is that being at work had an independent effect on positive effect. So I had a very lucky sample. Everyone had a nice job, obviously, or terrible children. That's not quite clear. But then, like showing these three virtue states also had independent effects on positive effects. So no matter where you were in the job role or wherever, acting wisely, courageous, and fair-minded was positively linked to positive affect. But what was most interesting here for me were the indirect effects. So the effects of like that wisdom, courage, and justice had while being in the job role, and these were all significant. So showing these three virtue states while being in the job role had an increased positive effect of participants while being in that job role. So I find that quite interesting because we heard a lot about normative standards of virtues, but I think this underlines that these virtue states may also have a function, at least in the way that I measured them. They are maybe functional and adaptive. So to wrap it up, virtues seem to be well described as density distributions because individuals show, in fact, a large degree of inconsistency in their behavior from situation to situation. But on the other hand, they are also stable between person differences in their average level and also in their size of the distribution. And this variability is not totally random, but virtue states vary partly as a function of the social role context people are acting in, and there are specific virtual role associations, and individuals differ in their reactivity to specific role demands. And finally, virtues seem to be also important predictors of positive and negative effect, and acting in a virtuous way even partly mediates a path between being in the job role and positive effect. So, well, in sum, I think it's fair to say, welcome back, old friend. It's nice to have you back in personality psychology, and I think it's only necessary that we consider you as a more dynamic concept than we did before. So Patterson and Seligman were probably right when they called their approach virtues in action. Thank you very much.
Now we'll do questions, and Wiebke prefers that I call on people, so I will go ahead and raise your hands if you're interested.
Sort of this is an obvious question after, but what do you think about the fact that I think that you're tracking self-report or sort of self-description of wisdom, honesty, courage, and even without raising the issue of dishonesty on the part of the participants, we might think that that's not actually tracking those qualities, or what we would describe as an instance of honesty and so forth. And particularly in the case where somebody would have to describe themselves as having been unfair or faithless. I can imagine rationalizing my behavior in such a way that I wouldn't be very willing to describe what I did in that way.
So yeah, self-descriptions are, of course, when it comes to like so desirable traits, it's an issue, right? And it is true that the distributions were not all like that normal, that the one of the participants that I've shown. There's some like there is some bias maybe going on, like in a some social desirability. But I think that this experience sampling approach is like pretty well suited to capture what's going on in that moment. And you can imagine you have 60 responses of participants, and if you get like a distribution, even if that's like slightly biased, you get a pretty good idea of that intra-individual range of behavior. On the other hand, but I agree, and that is actually another part of my project that I didn't present today, is how not only like people perceive their own characters, but also how others perceive like their character traits. So in another part of the study, I collected peer reports, two peer reports of people who knew that person only in the job role, and then 2 peer reports of persons who knew that person only in the family role. And I'm still busy with like analyzing the data, but at the moment it seems as if there is some substantial overlap, at least in general. Yeah.
I think first Eric.
Awesome talk, and I'm thinking about the link between sort of acting virtuously and experiencing more positive affect or less negative affect. Have you looked in your data, or is there a possibility in your data to make the following claim, that the people for whom acting in a virtuous way produces more positive affect are the ones who, in general, act more virtuously? That is, could you look at the reinforcement, sort of, if acting virtuously for me has really strong beta, like that just sends me really happy. Then at the sort of mean level of how virtuous I am, I actually show that on average I act more virtuously than the other Eric who doesn't feel good at all.
Yeah. So what is? So maybe I didn't get it. So what is your idea that this, like, over time increases positive effect?
Yeah, that you could speak to the, like, there's a reinforcement contingency that when I show wisdom, it makes me feel really good, and so that over time I show more wisdom behavior than somebody who feels kind of crappy when they say something that's true.
Yeah, that is a neat idea. I was thinking about also analyzing the data in a longitudinal way. So to look whether there are maybe cross-legged links. That is what you meant, right? From situation to situation. The problem here is that because we had working parents, we haven't had the same schedule for every parent. So it was not like that 10, 12, 3, etc. So there was not similar for each participant, but we did it in a way to make sure that we had measurement occasions in both roles equally distributed. So there were some parents who started at 8. It was all, both had the like same distances, but some started at 8, some later. So I don't know how to take that into account maybe for the analysis, but that's more a technical issue. I'm pretty sure that will work. But I haven't done that because of that reason. So.
Rashina, is that cool?
Rasha. Yeah, thanks. So this is super interesting. I just wanted to get clear on some of the details of, so when you were asking them to report their virtue state, was that supposed to be a report of, like, what they were feeling, or were they describing their action? So if they were to say, I did a foolish thing, or I did a wise thing, or I feel wise and foolish, or what?
No, it was actually like they all had an introductory session, so we trained that with each participant. We explained them what to do and what we mean. So I think this is a very good question that is crucial to the study, that everyone have the same idea about what's going on. And they were asked to think about the last 30 minutes, about their behavior, thoughts, and feelings, and they were supposed to rate the degree. So we used adjectives to which they would describe their behavior, thoughts and feelings, as more like the one that I don't know, going back takes ages, but for example, smart versus unwise, brave versus coward. So they should think about their behavior. They were not asked to name specific behaviors that they have shown. They were not asked to describe what they actually did, but to rate the degree to which they found their behavior more one or the other.
Okay, so then the question that I was thinking was, you described these in your diagram. You had these two different kinds of effects. There's the jobs effect on the positive affect, and then there was this mediation. Right? Mm-hmm. So I guess what I was thinking was, are these actually virtues? Are they separate entities that are mediating the positive affect, or is it just part of the job in which they can say about their behavior in the job, oh yeah, I'm behaving competently, I'm behaving wisely, and courageously and fairly, right? So I was just wondering if the virtues were sort of something separate, a separate entity which was then being manifested on top of their performance in their job, or whether it was just.
Well, yeah. The findings suggest that the virtues itself, they had independent effects on positive effect. and the job had independent effects on positive effect. But in the job, showing these virtues had an extra effect on positive effect. So I think that it shows exactly what you said, that
So I'm interested in potential implications, at least for our understanding of these 6 virtues in a subordinate structure. So I mean, I think one message you can take from this is that 3 of these are agentic virtues, or virtues that function well in an agentic context, and the other 3 are more communal. What would you think about that?
I think that is a very good and empirically supported idea, because so I didn't present all the technical stuff. I tried to take really care with regard to the measurement, because I think that's a crucial thing. We don't take that much care when it comes to experience sampling. And what I did is, for all these measures, first of all, explanatory multi-level factor analyses, and then also confirmatory at the within and also at the between person structure. And it turned out that there is indeed a 6-factor structure that fits well on the within person level, but a 2-factor structure on the between person level, and that is agency and communion. Same goes for big 5. So, yeah.
So, I may be misunderstanding this, but so I'm a philosopher, so there's 2 things that could happen. Let's say in one role, you report yourself very courageously. Courage comes out a lot in this role, and it doesn't come out a lot in this role. You report yourself courageous here, not as courageous in this role. One possibility is that in both of the roles, you have an equal number of opportunities to behave courageously. It's just that you rise to the occasion in this role, and you don't rise to the occasion in that role. But the other possibility is just that this role gives you many occasions in which you can act courageously. So you report yourself as acting courageously. And this other role doesn't give you many opportunities to act courageously. So you take a soldier and you say, we've got 2 roles, when you're on the battlefield and when you're peeling potatoes. Now, how often do you report yourself as courageous when you're on the battlefield? Many, many times. How often do you report yourself as courageous when you're peeling potatoes? Not very often. This wouldn't be a matter of the role affecting the display of a virtue. It would be a matter of the role giving you, one role giving you opportunities for display, and the other role not giving you opportunities for display. So I'm just wondering, can that be happening in this case? I mean, I would have thought that in the job role, you have the opportunity to be courageous, for example, stand up to your boss, or drive a hard bargain. Whereas I don't think parenting calls for much courage. So, I mean, how much is that?
Depends on your child.
Well,
I think so. I think that is an interesting idea, because I think actually that is part of the idea why I think the social role context is a good idea to structure situations, because it clusters situational cues that elicit certain behaviors more likely than others. So I think that is actually part of the idea, because I think it's a good idea to look at that. And so there are 2 maybe aspects that I haven't mentioned or I haven't pointed out enough. So first of all, the way that I measured roles was not, I haven't asked, are you in the parent role or in the job role? I asked, to what degree were you in that role? And they were slightly negative correlated. So, but it was not that they were like orthogonal or like orthogonal. Thank you very much. So there were situations in which the parents were in the job role while being in the parent role too. And so this is how I treated these 2 roles. The other thing is that there were individual differences in the way people react. So if it's only the situation that triggers me, like that gives me the chance to show a certain virtue in a certain role, I would expect that everyone shows it. If it's only the situation, the role. But there were significant and substantial individual differences in the way that people react. So there must be something going on within individuals that leads them to either show that or not in that role context.
But you might agree that some of the pairs are more likely to give you an equal number of opportunities in the 2 roles, the parent role and the job role. Like fair versus unfair, you might have lots of opportunities to be fair or unfair in parenting if you've got one-to-one child, and lots of opportunities at work. But as I say, courage.
I think it's part of the idea actually why I used it. So I think it's not a threat actually to the approach, because I think, of course, I assume that there are important situational pressures or chances. You can formulate it as demands or also like chances. It depends on how you frame it, why we show certain behaviors. But I think we probably differ. There are differences if you control for this situation. There are differences within the situation. Individuals differ in the way they react to it, for example.
I'll add a follow-up question real quick. It seems to me that, that's very likely what you're saying. It's probably true. It seems to me you can actually find out if it's only opportunities, because you have as a very rare opportunity to do aggregations within each role, right? And then do it for each week. So you could create 4 means for each person.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And then you could correlate across roles.
Yeah.
So if they're more courageous in their job, are they also more courageous at home?
Yeah.
If there is a real correlation there, it's very unlikely to be that they happen to have a job that has more opportunities for courage,
yeah.
and also a home life that has more opportunities for courage, and rather it's probably something, it could be the case that it lines up that way, you can't rule it out for sure, but it's unlikely. So that would argue that it's, that the person is bringing something to it,
Yes,
the situation.
yeah.
And I love it. So unfortunately, I guess I don't get to see that today, but hopefully I'll see that someday.
Maybe.
I think, who was, you were next to
Can I see the next slide? Did that have like
yeah.
other measures?
That? Slide?
Well, so did you also have like big 5 measures at baseline?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess I'm wondering, did you try to explain those level 1 effects with level 2, like between individual differences?
Yeah, I tried. I looked at that, and I didn't find any interesting. Like there was no clear pattern. Sometimes number of children had an effect on how virtuous you were, and especially how much temperance you had to show, and something like that. So, but that was it actually. There weren't any. I couldn't find any cross-level interactions, unfortunately. So, yeah.
Okay.